Now that we've had a couple primer videos on information about ships, let's get to the real stuff that we want to know. How do ships work in combat in Dungeons & Dragons? Hey fellow Game Masters, I'm Richard Quiner. Welcome back to the RPG Daily, your daily dose of all things tabletop role-playing games, helping you build your world and master your game. Like I said, we've already covered ship stat blocks, ship crew, and officers. Now we're going to talk about ship combat and how the vessels themselves play into warfare on the high seas. It's kind of an interesting situation. It took me a little bit to really fully understand what was going on, and I think I got a good interpretation of it. I have yet to do my own playtesting and make sure this actually works, so take all of this with a grain of salt. And it bears repeating, I'm sharing the rules from Ghosts of Saltmarsh. If your DM has different rules of how this stuff works, roll with it, go with their rules because it's their game, it's not mine. That being said, let's dive into how ships work in combat. So in combat, ships are mechanically very similar to players. We've talked about the stat blocks, how they have actions, and certain actions they can take on their turn. They also have movement speed. They have different variables that come into play, similar to an adventure party. And this all starts off with initiative. When you roll initiative in a ship-to-ship combat scenario, the ship is going to roll initiative along with the party. The ship rolls their initiative, they apply their dexterity modifier, which oftentimes could be a negative, and then they also apply their crew quality score, which we talked about briefly in the last video. The rest of the adventure party and the enemies will also all roll their initiative as well, and all the enemy ships would also roll their initiatives. The ships then, when it is their turn in combat, have the chance to take their actions. Each ship stat blocks lays out what actions they can take, including how much they can move, how much they can turn, those kind of things, but ultimately it is the captain's decision what the ship actually does on their turn. As the example ship stat block, they had 3 actions they could take on their turn, and they had 3 options. So the captain could have the ship do each of those options in whatever order they choose. They don't have to follow step-by-step orders, but it is the captain's decision. Personal thoughts on this? I feel like that takes a lot of the potential out of the party's hand, especially if a party member becomes the captain. Granted, if you get to that case, you would hope that the party is supportive of that person being the captain rather than just being pushed into that situation and everyone being against it or her. So that's just my 2 cents. I think having the captain make all the decisions about what the ship actually does on its turn takes away from that. The ship can move, the ship can attack usually, the ship might have other abilities that come into play, and then you will continue down the combat order. Following the initiative, the party members can each take their turns, the other ships will take their turns, the enemies will take their turns, and combat will flow that way. Where this gets a little more in-depth is when you look at the other crew members. The captain, the first mate, and the bosun gain additional action options. These are not new actions, they don't get an extra action on their turn, they just have these options that they can use their action to do. First up is the take aim action, so when the crew member is within 10 feet of a weapon on board the ship, they can use their action to have the crew members really aim that weapon, giving that weapon advantage on their next attack roll before the end of the ship's next turn. The other option they have is full speed, in which the crew member encourages the rest of the crew to get that ship going a little faster. They use their action, the crew member then gets to roll a d6, multiply that times 5, and add that in feet to the regular movement speed of the ship. So if the speed of a ship is normally 30, and that crew member rolls a 3 times 5 is 15, you add 15 onto 30, you have a 45-foot movement because that crew member decided to use their action to go full speed ahead. The stipulation on this, though, is multiple crew members may choose to use this action, but the effects do not stack on top of each other. The ship will act with the highest of the full speed effects. Where ship-to-ship combat gets a little wishy-washy and fuzzy is when it comes to dealing with the crew. Because most of these ships have a lot of crew, anywhere from 20 to 100 crew members, you're going to have to figure out what's going on with them, because also the amount of crew left alive impacts how fast the ship can go, how many actions they can do on their turns, how many weapons can actually be fired, these kind of things. So as a baseline, it's really easy to assume that the crew members, the unstat blocked crew members, are kind of scattered around the ship in an even, so you can have enough crew members at each of the weapons, enough crew members helping pilot the ship and get it moving. You can fulfill all the actions of the ship. You are welcome to individually manage 100 ship crew members if you want, but that is up to you. This is a simplified version where you just assume they're all over the place. Most of the ships also, when it comes to crew members, they list the type of crew member they are, the stat block for that crew member. This comes into play when you try to kill the crew member. So party members may choose to attack individual crew members with their weapons. You might, shoot a bow from one ship to another and try to hit a certain crew member. Those kind of things can be individually resolved as attacks. The adventure party will almost always be able to find a standard crew member to hit. Where this really changes though is when you're going to deal with spells like lightning bolt and fireball, which affect an area instead of an individual. These ones are also simplified in the book with the idea that when someone casts a spell of this effect of an area, you roll 1d6 per spell level to determine how many crew members are caught inside the area of this spell. So for example, a fireball is a 20-foot radius sphere. If you cast that at 4th level, for example, you would roll 4d6, and that would be how many crew members are caught in the blast of the fireball. And then you would have to deal with that number of crew members being caught in the spell, rolling the dexterity saving throws, those kind of things. That's kind of how it works. The important part is from the DM side and the party side. As players, you need to keep track of this stuff too, is you need to know how many crew members are still alive. Because as you lose crew members, your ship loses mobility, it loses usability, and when you run out of crew, your ship is kind of dead in the water. So you're going to want to keep that in mind. The next thing we keep in mind with ship combat is crashing. Nothing says naval battle like taking one ship and ramming it into another at high speeds. It's kind of the point. So a crash happens when one ship enters the space of another, or another object. It doesn't have to be another ship. It could be a rock, it could be a person, it could be a sea creature. Any kind of thing like that can be crashed into. So when this happens, if the object being crashed into is 2 sizes smaller than the ship, or even smaller than that, then the crash is avoided as the object is small enough it can kind of just get pushed out of the way or ignored, basically. But if it's any larger than that, then you have to deal with actual crash mechanics of this ship. The first thing that happens is the ship that moved into the space and caused the crash has to make a DC 10 Constitution saving throw. If that ship fails, then the whole of the ship, the whole component, being that, is going to take the damage from the crash. And there is a set of tables here I'm going to put on the screen that you can see the damage die you will roll depending on the size of the object you hit. So the larger the object, the more damage it's going to deal to the ship if you fail that con save. If the object itself is 1 size smaller than the ship will stop moving as well, as it's crashed into something big enough to keep it from going. If not, then the ship can keep moving and the object is pushed out of the way. When all this is happening, the creature or object that is being hit by the ship then needs to make a dexterity saving throw. This is kind of them getting out of the way. The DC for this saving throw is 10 plus the ship's, the crasher's, strength ability score modifier. If the object or creature fails the dexterity saving throw, then they will take half of the damage from the damage table based on the size of the ship that just hit them. If they succeed at the saving throw, they're going to take 1/4 of the damage based on the table and the die rolls. So you can see from this how there is a lot of potential for a ship to run into a smaller ship and cause a lot of damage to them and barely take any themselves. Ships generally have a pretty high constitution, and the larger the ship, the more constitution they're going to have, so being able to pass the con save is relatively easy. Being able to pass the dexterity save is a little harder because most ships have a pretty lower dexterity that's not going to give them a big bonus. So now we've covered the ideas of getting your ship into initiative order, the crew members being able to influence the ship combat itself, the captain making all the action decisions for the ship on its turn, and how you can run a ship into another ship and cause some real damage that way, as well as dealing with killing off crew members to cripple a ship by removing the people running it. That is combat on the high seas. You're going to be wanting to remove the crew, maybe have a boarding party at some point because that's more fun, and really just play into the on the ocean kind of fights. I think it's an interesting idea. I'm looking forward to being able to run this in a game very soon in the near future. I've hoped you liked this video. If you have liked the video, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, please. I would appreciate it. If you need to talk D&D with people, come join us on Discord. We have a pretty active community where we like posting memes and talking D&D and telling people how great our stories were. And if you need some miniatures, check out my Etsy shop in the description because I 3D print models and ship them all over the world. And yes, I do all the printing myself, so you're getting something 3D print crafted from me. I've been Richard, thanks for watching.